Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a mystery horror film, Wailing. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The film alludes with a biblical reference to a speaker who insists he is not a ghost, as he is flesh and bones. Then, a stranger is fishing on the lake while devising a bait. One dawn in rural Korea, a police officer arrives at a crime scene. He sees a dazed first killer, covered in blood with odd boils on his skin. The inspector says that first killer gruesomely stabbed the victims. Another officer adds that first killer didn't drink booze, but he's not talking. notices withered mugwort on the side yard and thick yellow-lit candles inside the killer's house. Meanwhile, a mountaineer tries to carry a deer, but he trips then adrift to sleep. His consciousness comes back, witnessing a Japanese old man, Jap, wearing nothing but a fundoshi. He realizes that Jap is eating a deer carcass, so he hides behind the stone. He secretes himself with wide eyes when Jap notices his presence. The mountaineer tries to peek again, but Jap seems nowhere. He trembles as he slowly looks up, only to see Jap with burning red eyes crawling towards him. Chingu, a past police friend, shares the mountaineer's story circulated by Mr. Gossip, their other friend. Chingu claims that all the dreadful events start when Jap arrives. Apache shrugs him off since the test results of first killer point out that he ate some wild mushrooms, which leads to his insanity. The power suddenly goes out, they shriek in panic upon seeing a naked woman outside full of bruises. Chingu tries to check outside, but the woman is nowhere to be seen. Apache wakes up from a nightmare the next day. After breakfast, Apache and his wife just finished making out in their car when suddenly his daughter, nicknamed Tital, asks them what they are doing. Apache is caught off guard, so he buys her many toys, including a pink hair clip. Tital is playing her ocarina on the lakeshore and continues to bond with Apache, unaware of the mysterious Jap menacing from a distance. The second case occurs with a burnt house this time. When Apache arrives, an apparently insane woman, second killer, is covered with ashes, clamoring nonstop while trying to get closer towards a presumably dead victim. Apache attempts to prevent her as second killer threatens to attack him. Apache doesn't waver. Strangely, the victim wakes up from the dead and pounces on him. Apache screams as he struggles to fight back, so the officers rush to rescue him. Shortly, he sees Jap silently observing the scene. Tital goes to the station to bring Apache extra clothes, but Apache still looks traumatized. Apache tells her to go home, which she obliges. She then exits without noticing her pink hair clip falls on the floor. Apache is about to pick the clip, but a sudden realization hits him. It turns out the naked woman from last night is also second killer. Second killer hangs herself in the morning. The police reveal that the victims did not burn to death, but rather stabbed. At lunchtime, Mr. Gossip recalls to Apache the rumor that Jap raped second killer, so she went crazy and started running outside naked. He supports it with his wife witnessing second killer mumbling gibberish with her skin coated with rashes and boils. In front of the burnt house, Apache presumes that Chingu is right, saying it can't be wild mushrooms. Chingu notices the peculiar no-name, who wears a white dress and a military jacket, throwing stones at the floor. They try to stop her, but she doesn't waver. To help their investigation, Apache asks Chingu to check a dermatologist for the two recent killers. No-Name keeps throwing stones at Apache. Apache asks No-Name her identity, but No-Name just invites him inside the house. No-Name illustrates the murder by saying that the head of an old woman was smashed like a watermelon. She then says that the old woman tells her that Jap is a ghost, and he will suck the old woman's blood dry. Apache remembers Jap from last night and Mr. Gossip's rumors. No-Name warns him that he should be careful, because if he keeps seeing Jap around, that means Jap is stalking him. Apache excuses himself as Chingu calls him. When he comes back, No-Name is out of sight. Apache attempts to find her, but he sees Jap and Fundoshi devouring a deer instead. Apache's adrenaline finally kicks in, but he stumbles out of fear. Jap catches his panicking figure on the ground, ready to devour him. Strangely, it's a horrific nightmare. When Apache wakes up, his wife asks him what terrible sin he committed to shriek uncontrollably. He then notices a medicine bag, and it turns out Tital is sick. Apache checks Tital on her room, but gets bewildered when they hear a weird noise, presumably from a flying creature. Later on, Chingu conveys to Apache that the dermatologist is unsure what happened to first killer. To find another lead, they head to the mountaineer's shop. The mountaineer affirms the gossip about Jap's deer eating, and shows them proof of his empty cabinet for hunting. He claims that he has stayed the hell away from the mountain since that day. He then describes how Jap eats the deer carcass, suspecting Jap is not a human, and he got something to do with the recent deaths. He guides them to the mountains where Jap resides, but unmanly stops when he sees dead animals. He instructs them that the Jap's house is just over the hill, and he's off to go. Appa stops him as he should show them the house. The mountaineer struggles, then falls down. He gets up and curses them to get hit by the lightning, but his curse bounces back to him as he gets hit by lightning. They bring the mountaineer to the hospital. Suddenly, the nurses rush to First Killer's room. They follow the commotion to see First Killer's snapping bones and spitting a freaky amount of blood. Shortly, First Killer dies, leaving them in distress. After First Killer's horrifying death, Appa and Chingu decide to drink. Chingu tells Appa to go to Jap's house tomorrow as he claims that something is going on. Appa follows Chingu's sight. He sees the joyous lady wearing a sweater with familiar boils on her neck. Appa comes home and finds Tital wailing in fear. She tells him that there is a strange man trying to enter their house. The next day, Appa is surprised to see Tital seems well eating a fish. Grandma drags Appa outside, claiming that something's off because Tital doesn't eat fish. She informs Appa that she's going to consult a recommended shaman since something is wrong with Tital. Chingu brings his deacon nephew called Sinbu, who knows how to speak Japanese. When they arrive, Jap is nowhere to be seen, so they start to inspect. Appa sees thick yellow-lit candles and a seemingly occult skull. On the other door, Chingu finds a room with the same candles illuminating bizarre photos on the wall. It turns out that Jap seems to photograph his victims, including First Killer and Second Killer. Meanwhile, a dog attacks Appa and Sinbu, but shortly calms as Jap shows up. Chingu remains on his spot, glancing on a familiar shoe out of other belongings. On their way back, Chingu confirms their suspicion. He mumbles that Jap takes photos of them and takes his victims' belongings. Appa asks what he really saw, and his world seems to collapse when Chingu finds the shoe of Tital, thinking that she might be the next victim. Appa runs to their home, asking Tital if she loses her shoe, and if she knows about the Japanese man living in the village. But Tital flouts, saying what's so damn important. Later on, he finds her diary with fierce and demonic sketches. He also finds a burn hole on some pages, so he scurries to inspect Tital's body. Appa is even more devastated when he sees the familiar rashes and boils. Tital suddenly wakes up, accusing him of assault. Grandma and Appa's wife are trying to stop her, but Tital exclaims that she's gonna kill them all. Appa and Sinmu go back to Jap's house the next day, but they only see an empty photo chamber. Jap states he burned them, so Appa threatens the stoic Jap. Appa then destroys Jap's belongings and eventually kills the wild dog when it attempts to attack him. After that, Appa walks out and gives 3 days for Jap to leave the town, or else he will be killed like his dog. But Jap seems unfazed and has a plan in mind. The next day, Appa's wife shrieks upon seeing a hanging dead animal. Appa tries to stand, but his feet are limp. While getting acupuncture, Appa asks where Tital is, then Grandma replies she's at home with a neighbor watching her. Appa becomes anxious, so they quickly go home, only to see Tital seems to stab the neighbor. The recommended Mr. Shaman finally arrives the following day. He then notices a jar, then smashes it. A dead raven from the broken pot is revealed as Mr. Shaman remarks that it's a wicked spirit, which possibly causes the murderous incidents. Shortly, Mr. Shaman's first ritual commences, as he exclaims the spirit to leave. He then checks up on Tital and asks Appa who he met that he isn't supposed to. Appa answers it's Jap, to which Mr. Sham remarks that he's not a man, but a ghost. He adds that they have to do something, or else everyone will perish. At the same time, the third case appears. Third Killer murdered his wife, then threw her on a well. Meanwhile, Mr. Shaman tells Appa that he's casting a deadly hex. Since it's a dangerous ritual, Mr. Shaman imposes a shining 10 grand for his service. Mr. Shaman changes his clothes, showing the same fundoshi as Jap. He adds Jap is the master of evil, and he will destroy the village if it's not stopped. Appa asks why it has to be Tital. It turns out that Jap is just randomly fishing and Tital took the bait. In another scene, Jap glances at the rotten Third Killer with a seemingly wicked plan. The ritual day comes. Simultaneously, Jap buys roosters for his presumable tradition, then implores with a fundoshi. No Name silently observes him from a distance. Eventually, Jap and Mr. Shaman start their separate rituals. Mr. Shaman dances, Jap plays his drums while shaking. Mr. Shaman proceeds to slit the throats of roosters while Jap slits ravens. Meanwhile, Tital keeps on struggling and screaming. Mr. Shaman proceeds to dip his face on the rooster's blood. He spits it onto his knives, then cuts the effigy. Jap continues his ritual with a recent photo of Third Killer. Jap finishes his wicked routine, then weakens, slowly drifting out of consciousness. Tital's bones crack as she begs Appa to stop Mr. Shaman. He instantly stops the ritual. Seconds later, Jap gains back his consciousness, and No Name suddenly appears in front of him. Shortly, Sinbu is struck upon knowing everything started when they inspected the house. Sinbu and Appa consult the church, but Father declares the church can't do anything for them. Appa then gathers his squad to execute Jap. But then, Jap is not home. The zombie-like third killer suddenly attacks them. They notice Jap observing from a distance, so they chase him. Unfortunately, they think Jap jumps off the cliff, unaware of him hanging around on edge. While Jap seemingly cries, he sees No Name looming again. Jap runs once again as No Name hunts him. While on their way home, Appa suddenly takes an evasive maneuver to avoid colliding with a truck. Abruptly, there's a fall in the windshield, so they check if that's a human. It's presumably human, with a bloody and seemingly dead Jap on the ground. They throw Jap's body on the side of the road while No Name is silently glancing at them. Appa eventually sighs in relief to see a recuperated tea towel. Strangely though, a hasty Mr. Shaman tries to call Appa, but he's unattended. The mystery still escalates, with now Chingu as the killer. Sinbu goes to the crime scene, only to see his bloody uncle in a reverie. Mr. Shaman goes to Appa's house, but he strangely vomits blood. The peculiar No Name commands him to leave. Mr. Shaman obeys and goes back home, but a raven suddenly crashes to his house. He gathers his belongings, then flies to Seoul. As he drives, locusts scatter his windshield, giving him a sign that his task isn't finished yet. Mr. Shaman speeds back to the village and calls Appa, urging him to get tea towel. Appa is confused about what's happening. Mr. Shaman informs him that he cast the hex on the wrong ghost. Mr. Shaman tells him about No Name's appearance earlier, saying that she's the real evil spirit. Appa asks him who's Jap. Mr. Shaman says Jap is trying to kill No Name, and he's a shaman too. Meanwhile, Sinbu bravely goes to Jap's house as he holds a rosary and a sickle. Appa rushes back home, but he can't find tea towel. He hurries outside. Then he sees No Name telling him that tea towel is possessed by an evil spirit. She reiterates to him that Jap is a ghost, and he's trying to suck blood. No Name conveys that tea towel just got back, but warns him not to go, or else his whole family will perish. Appa is confused, saying Jap is dead, but No Name says death cannot touch Jap. She informs Appa that the demon will soon enter his house, and she lays a trap, so he needs to wait until he's caught. Appa asks No Name if she's a woman or a ghost. No Name answers she's a woman trying to save his daughter. Shortly, No Name tells him that the demon is already there at the house, as Tea Towel strangely appears, who seems out of herself, as she devours a lot of food. Meanwhile, Mr. Shaman rings Appa and confuses him, saying that he must not let her tempt him. But then, No Name says Mr. Shaman and Jap are on it together. No Name then tells Appa that the rooster will cry 3 times when the demon is snared. She instructs him to wait until the third cry, as the first cry occurs. Sinbu finally locates Jap in a cave and tries to confirm his suspicion. Sinbu then asks Jap to reveal his double form and promises to leave him alone if he obliges. Jap then oddly gibbles, revealing he would not let Sinbu leave the cave. Appa then asks No Name why it has to be his daughter as she got sick first. No Name responds Appa has sinned. It turns out that Appa's family is marked for death when Jap looms on the lake and when Appa sees Jap on the burnt house. The rooster cries the second time. No Name holds his hand when he's about to leave. Appa slowly turns back to her, only to see Tea Towel's pink hair clip, and identifies the woman's sweater. Appa remembers the military jacket she wore before, which turns out to have third killer's name on it. He then believes that it is all No Name's doing, so he rushes back home. Meanwhile, Jap recites the familiar verse shown at the film's beginning, saying a ghost does not have flesh and bones. Sinbu is even more frightened upon seeing a hole in Jap's hand. No Name grudgingly yells as she fails to protect the family. When Appa enters his house, the mugwort set by No Name instantly withers. Appa sights a gruesome scene with loved ones' lifeless bodies. Appa catches Tea Towel's bloody figure standing before him, so he calls her with misery. Sinbu finally confirms that Jap is really the devil as he has revealed his terrifying form. The devil Jap snaps a photo of him, causing Sinbu to cry for his life. The dawn comes. Mr. Shaman reaches the messy home with blood-stained and hazed Tea Towel. He snaps a photo of the wrecked family, including the possibly severely wounded Appa, then gets back to his car. In the end, it turns out that he is indeed working with Jap as he accidentally drops a wooden box, exposing a pile of sufferers' photographs. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.